Good morning, guys. So we're ready for our mystery continent of the day. And this continent should be easy to guess because we've already talked about all the other continents. So this is our last one, but we're going to go ahead and open up our bag to see if this gives it away. Are you ready? So the first thing that we have is an emperor penguin. Oh, and then we have some Adelie penguins. So some smaller penguins. And this should really give it away. We have a map of Antarctica. It's a fact wheel that goes all the way around and tells you about Antarctica. So our continent for today is Antarctica. And so something about Antarctica that's kind of interesting is that people don't actually live there. Now, scientists will go and stay there for a few months, but no one actually lives there all the time. They just stay and observe and do experiments. So some other facts that we're going to learn about Antarctica, it is the 5th largest continent. So it includes no independent countries. So there's no countries because no people actually live there. 98% of the whole continent is covered in ice. So there's only a little bit of the continent that's not covered in ice. It is the windiest, coldest, and driest place on Earth. It is home to different species of penguins. The Adelie penguins are the most common there, and those are those little penguins that we saw. So we're going to go ahead and read our Cinderella story for Antarctica. And so this one's a really fun one. It's called Cinderella Penguin, or the Little Glass Flipper. So it's a flipper instead of slipper. And it's written by Janet Perlman, and that's the author and the illustrator. So there once was a young penguin named Cinderella who lived in a faraway land with her stepmother and 2 stepsisters. Cinderella was a kind and gentle penguin, but her stepsisters were selfish and vain. So there are some really good describing words for those characters. It automatically told you Cinderella was kind and gentle, and then her stepsisters were selfish, which means that they only think about themselves, and then vain, which means that they think about themselves a lot too. Cinderella did all the chores. She even had to pick up after her stepsisters, while they never had to do a thing. The sisters wore the finest of clothes and slept in huge, cozy feather beds with silk sheets and fluffy pillows. Poor Cinderella wore nothing but worn-out tatters and slept in the old stone cellar up on a small shelf beside some old tin plates. So they weren't really treated fairly, were they? One day it was announced that the Penguin Prince was giving a costume ball. The sisters and their mother received an invitation. Cinderella wanted to go too, but they just laughed at her. The prince would never want to marry a shabby cinder block like you. For weeks, the house was filled with talk of the ball. The sisters had costumes made up with the finest fabrics. They ate only the tiniest of meals so they could have the tiniest of waist. And they were always in front of the mirror posing and practicing their curtsies. Finally, the night of the ball arrived. Cinderella rushed around, ironing her stepsisters' costumes and helping them dress. Then, without a thank you or goodbye, the carriage swept the stepmother and the stepsisters off to the ball. Cinderella burst into tears. She felt so alone and unhappy. Suddenly, in a glow of blue light, the great fairy penguin appeared before her. "Why are you crying, Cinderella? Do you want to go to the ball?" she asked. Cinderella blinked back her tears. "Oh, yes, more than anything." "Then you shall." "First," said the fairy penguin, "you must fetch me a pumpkin from the garden." Cinderella didn't know how a pumpkin could help her get to the ball, but she quickly brought her the best one she could find. The fairy gave it a firm tap with her wand, and it magically turned into a beautiful golden carriage. Then the great fairy penguin went to the kitchen and found 6 mice carrying a huge chunk of cheese. With a tap of her wand, she turned them into a handsome team of 6 horses. She turned the cheese into a fat coachman in uniform. They all marched out the door and took their places as if it was the most natural thing to do. Now you can go to the ball. Are you happy, Cinderella? Said the fairy. Oh, yes, said Cinderella, but she looked sadly down at her ragged clothes. Oh, I almost forgot, said the fairy, and with a tap of her wand, Cinderella's penguin's rags became a beautiful gown with gold trimmings and a real gold tiara, and on her feet were a pair of glass flippers, the prettiest and most delicate that Cinderella had ever seen. Now, one last thing, said the great fairy penguin. The magic spell ends at the stroke of midnight. The carriage will turn back into a pumpkin, the horses back into mice, and the coachman into cheese. And you'll be dressed in rags, so you must leave the ball before midnight. Cinderella promised to remember. Then, waving goodbye, she stepped into the carriage and rode off. Her heart was filled with joy. When Cinderella arrived at the palace, the ball was in full swing. She was welcomed with a fanfare of trumpets, and she marveled to see so many fine penguins wearing such magnificent costumes. Her stepsister and stepmother didn't notice her. They were too busy gobbling down snacks and party sandwiches at the buffet tables. But the penguin prince noticed Cinderella at once. Who is she? He asked the courtiers. She is the most beautiful penguin I have ever seen. Cinderella had never met as handsome and charming a penguin as the prince. From the first dance together, he never left her side. They whirled and twirled around the dance to the applause of the admiring crowd. Who is the beautiful young penguin who has captured the prince's attention so completely? Everyone whispered. What a handsome couple, everyone said. How well they danced together, they sighed. Cinderella had never felt so happy. She wished this night would last forever. Then, suddenly, she glanced up at the clock. In all the excitement, she had forgotten about the fairy's warning. Oh, she cried, it's almost midnight. I have to go. And as she ran from the palace in such a hurry that one of her glass flippers fell off and was left lying on the steps. As Cinderella rode away in her carriage, the prince called out, Oh, please don't go. But she was gone. He picked up the glass flipper and said sadly, Who was she? I don't even know her name. The next day it was announced that the prince would marry the penguin whose foot fit in the little glass flipper. There was such great excitement throughout the land. First, all the princesses tried it on, but then all the penguins of the court, and the flipper was always too small. The royal footmen were commanded to take the flipper from house to house. The stepsisters spent the whole day perfuming and powdering themselves. Cinderella, said the stepmother, your clothes are too ragged to even be seen by the royal footmen. Go downstairs and polish the silver until they leave. Oh, please, I would like to try the flipper on too, said Cinderella, knowing it would fit her perfectly. The stepsisters laughed, and they looked down at Cinderella's webbed feet. For the first time, they noticed how delicate they were. A knock came at the door. Quick, hide her, said the stepsisters. They grabbed Cinderella and threw her down the cellar steps and slammed the door. Poor Cinderella, she lay upside down, caught with her foot in the tight door, unable to get free. When the footman came in, the stepsister pushed and shoved to try to be the first one to try on the flipper. They were so intent on snatching the flipper from each other that it slipped from their grasp, flipped high in the air, and landed squarely on Cinderella's foot. It Everyone stared. It was a perfect fit. As the footman opened the door and helped Cinderella up, the great fairy penguin appeared. With the tap of her magic wand, she transformed Cinderella's tattered rags into magnificent clothes that she had worn to the ball. Cinderella was overjoyed. Oh, thank you, fairy penguin. I thank you with all of my heart. The stepsisters and stepmother's beaks dropped wide open. They stared at Cinderella, sputtering with amazement. Look, oh my, it's her. Oh no. Oh dear, we really put our foot on it this time. The Penguin Prince and Cinderella Penguin were married the very next day, and the wedding bells rang throughout the land. Never before could anyone remember such a joyous and happy wedding. Cinderella and the prince truly loved each other, and they lived together happily ever after. All right, guys. So this was our Cinderella Penguin story. And so what you're going to do now is you're going to go to Seesaw, and I have a matching activity. So since we've seen all the different Cinderella stories, what you're going to do is you're going to match the Cinderella story with the characters that were in it. So you'll just move the characters into the right spot, okay? All right, thanks for listening, guys.